I'm speaking with my Israeli counterpart I'm trying to buy goods from. I don't have cash. I don't have a credit card. I basically send them some paperwork, say, hey, some guy in Germany from the US is going to pay you in 30 days after I receive this product.
Trust me.
So that takes a lot of rapport building because, we were getting hundreds of $1,000s worth of materials for these projects in Israel, and I don't have a dime to show these guys for it. And it's really just based off relationship. And thank God the money came through at 30 days, so I didn't get buried in a quarry somewhere. But that showed me the cultural impacts of how important coffee can be to bring people together.
This episode is brought to you by Trident Coffee, the veteran-owned brand where every sip inspires you to live life full steam ahead. I've been drinking their coffees for a while now, and I'm glad to partner with a company whose products I use. At Trident, they're more than just coffee. They're storytellers. Crafted by veterans, their instant cold brew is perfect for those who serve, those who have served, and anyone who values wellness. Featuring natural ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics, it's more than just a morning pick-me-up. It's your new wellness ritual. Enjoy it at home or on the go, wherever your day takes you. Trident Coffee isn't just about great tasting coffee. It's about empowering you to be the healthiest version of yourself, because great veterans make great citizens. Try their instant cold brew today, along with many other coffee products, and taste the freedom of wellness. Remember, when you choose Trident, you're not just choosing coffee, you're choosing a path of connection through health and wellness. Head on over to tridentcoffee.com and use the promo code TDP15 for 15% off your order. Again, that's TDP15 for 15% off your order. This episode is brought to you by Soflete, a tactical fitness company founded by special operations soldiers. Soflete is dedicated to helping you achieve a healthy lifestyle. From expertly crafted training programs to high-quality proteins, pre-workouts, and sleep and recovery supplements, they've got everything you need to power through your day. Soflete also has a full line of clothing. They have you covered from shorts to cold weather gear. Embracing the motto, Die Living, Soflete inspires us all to embrace life with vigor and resilience. So take the first step towards a healthier you. Visit soflete.com, that's SOFLETE.com, and use the promo code TDP20 to get 20% off your order. Again, that's TDP20 for 20% off your order. My guest this episode began his time in the Navy at Annapolis in 2004. He was intending to be a pilot, but unfortunately, when he made it to flight school, they diagnosed him with a medical condition that forced him to change. So he opted for the Civil Engineer Corps. But after a few years and multiple deployments, the luster of the military kind of wore off, and he realized that he wanted to be his own boss. So he got out in 2016, he went to grad school, and founded his own company. Today, he's the CEO of Trident Coffee, based out of San Diego. And they're just about to open their third storefront location. This was a fun conversation, so let's get into it. Here's episode 150 with Eric Johnson.
Our concept is basically be a brewery, but for coffee instead of beer. So we're one of the only coffee shops that I know of that actually has 8 cold brews on tap, focused around health and wellness. And the Pacific Beach location has been phenomenal for us. It's right in our target demographic. People are already familiar with it.
Where exactly in PB is it?
So we got a really great location. It's about a block away from the pier on the corner of Mission and Hornblende. Mission and Hornblende. So a block away from the beach, great traffic. And so we're really excited for summertime there.
For those who don't live in the San Diego area, or for those that do, you also have locations in Imperial Beach and Coronado?
Correct, yes.
Which is the oldest?
So we started this concept down in Imperial Beach. So that has a really emotional tie to my family. My grandfather retired out of the Navy in the 60s. So my aunts, uncles all grew up in Imperial Beach, went to high school there. And so IB was a really cool opportunity for us to test this. Cheaper real estate for one. So we got a little bit more space than we needed so we can set up our coffee roaster, our brewery, basically have our production facility in Imperial Beach. Then we had our first tap room there joined to it. So that kind of got people familiar with it. Then we opened in Coronado in 2021, kind of during COVID. But it was a great opportunity for us to be a little bit closer to test this in that market, great military town. And so we built that out. And then we just opened the Pacific Beach one in March of this year.
Is your long-term projection to grow around military bases or military operations, or just grow in general?
So we've kind of taken a little different approach. So those tap rooms for us kind of really introduce customers to what cold brew is. It's still relatively new. You might go to a coffee shop, they have like one on tap. But cold brew as a category is growing at 26% a year, really geared towards kind of the younger consumer, younger demographic. So for this, we put that as the pedestal, the cornerstone. It's cold brew. Most places, their thing is their espresso machine. That's what Starbucks has built out over the past 40, 50 years. And that's what most coffee shops have followed suit with, is that espresso is basically 90% of their focus. Then they might have like one cold brew on tap. Since we're from San Diego, making this brewery concept that the consumer's already familiar with this craft aspect of it, now they just get that same experience from a brewery just with their coffee. And so we have those 3 locations. We're going to stay put for a while. And then now we're expanding our direct-to-consumer initiatives for some of this new products that we have coming up, which is like an instant cold brew. So shipping bulk liquid has been a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge just with freight costs, things like that. So we want to find the best way to get our customers the experience of cold brew just in a very convenient packaging. And so this instant cold brew allows us to still do that, but just reduce a lot of logistics concerns.
From your experience, for people coming into it, what do you find as some of their, I would say, hesitancies regarding the cold brew and the Nitro cold brew?
I think a lot of things is just perception. So you have coffee has been consumed hot for such a long time. And so we had to go through and basically kind of re-stigmatize or destigmatize how we feel coffee is best consumed. Through the cold brew process, you're going to get more caffeine, less acidity, and you're going to get more antioxidants. So coffee itself we see as actually a really great healthy beverage. But when you throw so much milk, cream, and sugar into it, then it kind of loses its efficacy in terms of being a health product. So there's numerous studies out there showing how healthy coffee can be when it's consumed in its kind of natural state, like its black state. And we found cold brew actually accentuates those health benefits. Because again, when a lot of people can drink black coffee, they get acid reflux potentially, it irritates their stomach because it's so acidic. And so we wanted to create something that is a healthier option for people to drink and still gives that creamy texture as it comes off nitro, just like a Guinness beer would. But then we still add stuff, but we add functional ingredients to it, MCT oil, collagen, mushrooms. So it's this really cool health and wellness experience just in a brewery mindset, taking away the espresso being the main focus of the coffee shop, making the cold brews kind of front and center.
I've seen recently, and I haven't tried any of them, but just straight mushroom coffee.
Mm.
What's the difference between straight mushroom coffee and adding mushrooms to your coffee?
So most of the mushroom products, they can either be a standalone where it's just the mushrooms, and then you're taking that and adding it to your coffee. Then there's other ones that are kind of pre-mixed in there with like an instant coffee product and then with the mushrooms as well. So it's kind of a convenience factor, convenience sake for the consumer. So, but the mushrooms do have a little bit more of an earthy flavor to them, just by nature of what they are. And so what we've kind of done is added MCT oil, added some electrolytes through there to kind of change the flavor profile and give it a creamier texture. So the earthiness of the mushrooms get way subdued. So you still get that coffee forward flavor. You still get that creaminess from the MCT oil. So that's how we've kind of played around with our version of it. And so it's still a very coffee drink. You're just getting the added benefits of having the mushrooms in with it as well.
We've talked about your coffee briefly, and we're going to talk about it some more. But let's take everybody back to you and growing up. Where were you born? Where's hometown?
So very fortunate, grew up here in San Diego. Both grandparents were in the military. My dad was a firefighter for the city of San Diego, so San Diego's home. So grew up here all the way through high school and got fortunate enough to get accepted to the Naval Academy to go for undergrad and get my commission. So spent 4 years out in Annapolis and did my thing there.
I'm going to pause you there real quick though. Growing up as a kid, what did you like doing? Were you into sports? Were you an academic?
I had a weird blend. I liked school, certain subjects, obviously, gravitated more towards, grew up playing basketball. So that was kind of like my high school sport. I dabbled in, the off-season things with track and field, volleyball, whatever. But basketball was my main sport growing up. And I went to school kind of where you could see aircraft fly out from Miramar. And so I'd see that pretty much routinely, almost daily. And I was like, I think I was probably around 15, 16, like, that's what I want to do. My grandfather served in the PBY Catalinas during World War II. He was an air crew guy. And so aviation was always something that kind of he passed on. He would always make model aircraft and we'd go test them and fly them. And so it just came to me one day, it's like, that's what I want to do. I want to fly. So I initially thought going to the Air Force Academy would give me the best option to be a pilot. And come to find out, actually, the Navy produces more pilots through all the different platforms they have than the Air Force Academy does. So very fortunate enough to get accepted there and pursue that dream, and got all the way through, graduated, and then I went down to Pensacola to check in for flight school, and they have a big physical before we even get started. And somehow my eyes were messed up. They found a condition called keratoconus, which is a weird astigmatism. No surgery, no waiver. Sorry, you just got to pick a new field. Luckily, I'd studied engineering at the Naval Academy to then transition to where I served in as in the Civil Engineer Corps with the Navy. And transitioned to that, did that for about 7 years, had an amazing time. Got to work with Seabees firsthand on 4 deployments in 5 years, and truly a remarkable experience. It's just obviously very different from what I thought of going into service, being in the jet, hopefully in a cockpit, into being on the ground. So I say I'm in the Navy, but I spent 3 weeks on a ship. That's the most I've ever spent on a ship, and thank God for it. I loved being land-based. It was amazing.
Growing up, were you a kid who kind of had, how do I want to put this? Did you push the envelope? Were you a rule follower? Where I'm going is that transition to going into the academy. What was that like for you?
I think from my memory, I'm sure I caused enough trouble for my parents, but like, I felt I was very much a rule follower all the way through, pretty disciplined, wanted to do the right thing, and just had this sense of purpose. And so I knew if I wanted to go into the military, kind of following the rules was part of the game. So I think I adapted to that pretty well. But it's funny, after like multiple deployments, like that really shifted for me to think about things extremely differently. So I started to question things a lot more towards my like 3rd and 4th deployment. And so that got me in a little bit of trouble, nothing crazy. But that's kind of when
the luster wears off, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute, I get to see behind the curtain now.
Well, I mean, you get exposed to different leadership styles, different mission sets, and then you just start piecing the puzzle together and like start to question things a little bit differently than you would have just blindly following. And so that really sparked the entrepreneurship side of me, because as most people know, the military is not necessarily a meritocracy. You have people who have been in for a while and they get promoted for X, Y, and Z reasons. You have some people who are very hard charging, very dedicated, very motivated, but they might be off on timing. They may not get the right opportunity. And so it ended up turning in where I saw the opportunity of, hey, if I want to really test my mettle, I have to do it on my own. I could follow the 20-year career path and do just fine. But I was at a point where risk was, I was going to be tolerant for it, so I could jump down the entrepreneurship pipeline. But it allowed me to really say like, hey, can I do this? I believe I can. And now it's time to test it. So that's what entrepreneurship offered me the opportunity to do outside of the military.
How old were you when you, in your mind, set your course, I'm going to the military, and that's what I want to do?
I feel it's like 15, 16 from my recollection of it. Just seeing the aircraft fly over, wanting to be a pilot. So from kind of that point on, I still had about 2 years left in high school to kind of get everything together, put all the ducks in a row, do all the paperwork. So started the application process, because for the academies, they're a little bit longer because you have to get some sort of congressional or Senate approval to get accepted. So it's like a 2-part process. The academic side is, submit your transcripts, letter of recs, all that. Then you need that other piece of the puzzle that took a while. So again, I think I was the last person accepted into the Naval Academy that year. I got the acceptance like April 17th. And so from then I had, 2 months before I shipped off to Annapolis and started plebe summer and go down that pipeline.
You mentioned that you initially thought the Air Force, but then transitioned to focusing on the Navy. Had that when you made that transition, where I'm getting at is, did you ever actively consider the Air Force, or did you just kind of immediately put all your baskets in the Navy? It
was actually the opposite. I applied for the Air Force Academy, didn't get accepted. So It made it kind of my choice easier in terms of going to the Naval Academy, because that was the only opportunity I got. So it was either, an ROTC program or going through the academy. And, being from San Diego, there's a huge military population, a huge academy alumni-centric organization. So it just led down the proper pipeline for that. So coming from San Diego, great military town, and going there just made the transition easier because it's such a big connection point between alumni coming back to San Diego to serve or retire.
Had you gone and visited both academies prior to applying?
I did. I went to the Air Force Academy, I believe, junior year in high school, and the elevation is no joke. Coming from sea level up there, like walking around up the hills was a challenge. But then I got to go to the Naval Academy my senior year to check everything out. They have programs that allow, potential applicants to come through, spend a day there, go through the whole day in the life of. And so that was great. My family came out with me. We went around DC and everything afterwards. So that was kind of the ceiling factor. Went, tested it out. And then from there, just whatever happens, happens. So rolled the dice and got into the academy, made it through somehow, and here we are.
When you came to the pivot point while you were at Annapolis and having to choose Navy or Marine Corps, was there ever a hesitation for you, or was it always Navy for you?
No, I had a phase sophomore year. I wanted to go Marine aviation. Mostly, again, being selfish of where their air bases were, where their stations were. So a little bit closer to home. And so I wanted to come West Coast. So you had Miramar or Yuma for mostly the Marine Corps, and then you have a couple other on the East Coast and Japan. But I made the transition into going Navy because I liked camping. I didn't necessarily care for the Marine Corps style of camping. So going through TBS, all that jazz, like, I'll just make it easier cut. I'll just cut the line and go straight into flight school.
What was your first entry into the academy? When did you get in?
June 2004 is when our plebe summer started. So got there towards the end of June. I think our I-Day was June 30th. So that's like the kickoff day for all of plebe summer. And so that's like our, 8 to 10 week intro kind of boot camp-ish thing. And then you have to spend the entire year as a plebe where you're just trying to figure things out and learn. And, it's that intro year where you're kind of bottom of the totem pole. And so survive that, and get through. And then from there, it's, still very military forward, but a lot of it's more academic from there, just intramural sports, going to school and staying healthy, and then basically just working on whatever pipeline you wanted to go into, submarines, aviation, surface warfare, whatever the case may be.
The little bit that I understand the way the academy works, there is some preliminary testing for you to be able to go aviation. You passed those tests,
Yep.
But then there were other tests when you actually got to flight school?
Yeah, so most of those are just like your annual physical. They do the optometry exam, just quick, hey, can you read the letters on the chart? And so passed all those, no problem. I still see 20/20, but when I got down there, they did the full gamut of testing. So they actually did a topography of my cornea, and then that's where they found the astigmatism. And so at that point in 2008, there was no surgery and no waiver. So I had to kind of refocus my efforts on what could I do in the Navy. And fortunately, at the time, there was like a overmanning situation. So I had 3 options. I can get out and become a civilian. They would write me out of my contract. I could go submarines, or I could go Civil Engineer Corps. I like the sun. I like being outside. So submarines was probably not down the pipeline for me. And with my engineering background, the Civil Engineer Corps was a great transition, because there's not very many Civil Engineer Corps officers either that come straight from the academy. It's very few. A lot of them are lat transfers, or like myself, medical disqualifications that allow them to go into what we call the restricted line service in the Navy. So just very lucky, happenstance, worked out very well for me, and had an amazing career, short, 7 years in the CEC. Loved it. It was great.
So I'll use myself as an example. When I wanted to become a police officer, I went and took the very standardized color blindness test. And for the red-green portion, couldn't see the numbers. I was very fortunate that I had already been working for that police department. So they took a vested interest in me. And the lieutenant in charge of training at that time called Sacramento, who standardized all training. And they went, oh, there's this test, which will test for partial color blindness. And sure enough, I passed it just fine. But what it verified is I've got partial red-green. Never impacted my career. The eye issue that you ran into, you mentioned there wasn't a waiver and there wasn't a surgery for it. What is that specific issue, and could somebody address it today that maybe you couldn't address back then?
I think I revisited it a few years ago, and I believe there is like a surgery now. So basically, it's a type of astigmatism where the cornea is peaked and off center. So light comes refracted differently into the eye. And so they're like, I can still see fine, still see 20/20. But they're like, hey, if you're trying to land on an aircraft carrier at night and they have all these bright balls that you need to track to like land at the right glide slope. They're like, if you see, because like I'll see the moon, and then I'll see a half phased out moon underneath it. So it's like a blurriness, more or less. So they're like, there's no waiver at this point, and the surgery is still too new. It's not like PRK or LASIK to fix that portion of it. But I believe now there is surgery and a waiver, but I was going up against two things. One, still relatively new. There was no surgery for it. And they were also overmanned. Like the wait to even start flight school was 7 or 8 months when I was down there with my other peer group. So they're like, hey, we just don't have the patience to wait. So just pick a different career and go on your own.
And what is the specifics? Is there a name to the stigmatism that you have?
Yeah, it's called keratoconus. And so I still have my medical records with it all, still see the topography of it. And so like I tried to get a second opinion and a waiver. So luckily I had some great teachers at the academy who were still well connected in the aviation community, got signed up, came back to San Diego to the subject matter expert here, same test, same result. So at that point I tried everything I possibly could. And this was just my fate for the time being of pivoting and going down a different career path.
And the reason why I'm asking this is granted, the backbone of the podcast is about transitioning out, but I've had some people ask me, can I address also potentially somebody young who's listening who wants to come in? If, to your knowledge, is there a way to test for this on your own? Can you just go to an optometrist? Because I'm thinking if there's a young man or a young woman who's thinking, hey, I want to go in the academy and I want to fly, it would be a shitty time to find out that you've got this once you've already gone through the process. Yep. Especially if they're not testing for it on the front end.
I forget the exact testing that they did, but they'll probably put you through the standard thing. If things are a little bit blurry, there would be the secondary test for them to do the topography scan of your cornea. From there, they can make the determination because it's basically like a heat map.
Got it.
So they'll do like blues, greens, reds, and stuff like that to show where the peak potentially would be on the cornea if you have that keratoconus. But I believe now it is rectifiable. They can do a surgery, and that would then basically similar to PRK and LASIK now, that would just make you fit for duty. So there wouldn't be any issues from an eyesight related standpoint to fly.
Back to you as a young boy growing up, your dad was a firefighter. No push towards staying at home, going the first responder route?
I think because my dad grew up in a military household. My grandfather was always so excited that I was going to the Navy. And unfortunately at that time, growing up, my grandfather wasn't in the best of health. I went through plebe summer. My grandfather ended up having a stroke from complications from type 2 diabetes. And so whenever I would come home from that plebe year, he was always bedridden, and I would always see my dad taking care of him. So I think there was a great sense of pride because that my grandfather was very excited that I was going Navy, kind of continuing that legacy from World War II and this, that, and the other. And so my dad always like, hey, you should always entertain the fire department if you ever wanted. Great community, great benefits, great career. But I just had a different thing I wanted to accomplish, slightly different from what my dad, but he was always very supportive. My family's been great just because I think we had that sense of service in the family already.
When you went in, were you thinking career?
I always left it open. I wasn't dead set. I'd say as long as I continue to have a great time, be around great people, doing a mission and purpose, I'd stay. And so that's kind of where it led me to the transition out of the Civil Engineer Corps was ended up doing 4 deployments in 5 years. Loved it. But that's very strange for my community. A lot of it is more desk job related, contracts oriented, construction oriented on military installations around the world. So the fact that I deployed so much in our expeditionary side was kind of an anomaly. We're only supposed to spend a very small portion deploying, and that's mostly with like CB battalions. But I lined up basically a CB battalion, individual augmentee to Afghanistan with the Army, and then ended up doing logistics construction support to NSW for my last 2 tours. But after that 3rd deployment, I went to my detail. I was like, hey, I've deployed 3 times. I'd love a desk job, shore duty job here in San Diego. I just bought a house. My family's here. I'd like to stay for my shore duty. One, also, it's a big concentration of CEC, so you can compete well against your peers for promotion instead of being a standalone guy somewhere where there's not much competition, to kind of that meritocracy piece I talked about. And he's like, sorry, all we have is Guam or Japan for you for your next tour. That's all we have open right now. So I looked at it as like, it's not what I want to do. I don't really want to go to those places right now. I'd wanted to kind of be close to home, spend some time with family during that period. So that's when I submitted my paperwork to resign my commission from active duty. And then I got the opportunity to deploy one more time in between that before I got out of active duty, and kind of use that time to prep for grad school, do a few other things like that, save up some money, and then kind of kick off the idea of Trident Coffee. Was that kind of during that iteration time was like, what do I want to do after my military career? And so came up with the idea of Trident Coffee and then worked on it from there, kind of leading up before I got out of the military.
How long would the deployments have been to Japan or Guam?
Probably 2 or 3 year orders. So I've heard nothing but amazing things. I'm not trying to downplay those 2 locations, but just for me at that time, that point in my career, I really wanted to stay local, to be around family, because, you know, you go on 3 deployments back to back to back. It's a long time being away, and just wanted to kind of build up for a couple of years before I had to move away again.
We've already kind of, and I say joke about it, but the luster of the military had kind of worn off a little bit. Even if you would have been able to get a deployment and stayed in San Diego, do you think you would have made it a career?
I think I positioned myself pretty well against where I was in the CEC. I really enjoyed it. If I could, again, find those jobs that kind of kept me closer to the expeditionary side, because that was the best part of working hand in hand with CBs who are super blue collar, dedicated construction guys. So it's a lot of hard work, a lot of hard, labor out in the sun. I just love that. So if I had to sit in a desk, behind a desk inside all day, it wasn't my thing. So it was very possible I could have stayed 20 years, finding the right, kind of lineup of jobs, but there's so much to chance. That's the hard part with the military. There's so many things that are timing related, outside of your control, to kind of basically kind of choose your own fate type game. And so I just wanted a little more control of kind of where my future led me. And so that's where I was at that time to make that transition out of the military.
So you mentioned that you submitted your packet, but then had one more deployment.
Yep.
So when did you submit your packet to get out?
I want to say I submitted in August of 2015.
In anticipation of getting out when?
That next summer. So July, August of 2016. That put me over the 8-year mark of total service. And so that was like a great time. I wasn't at 10 years, so I wasn't halfway there. So it was just like really good timing all around to make that transition. And so at that point, our command was deploying very readily to support Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Syria against ISIS. So I had the opportunity to deploy one last time just because we were kind of short on personnel. So we kind of made some deals and this, that, and the other. So my commanding officer let me deploy one more time to help support the deployment schedule.
Do I understand correctly from the way you're explaining it? Your assignment was you would deploy ahead, get stuff basically set up, and then once it's up and running, you and your team pull out?
It very much depends. The deployment to Iraq was with a group that was already had logistics established. So when we got there, it was just continuing the logistics supply chain and then any other auxiliary construction that was necessary for the outpost for the people that were there. We only had like 500 people, boots on ground at the time. So it was very small scale. So we would send a few CBs out to a small site, add plumbing, add AC, work on the electrical, get the base up and running for the infrastructure side, and then bring them back to kind of home base. Then we would deploy them around the country where they were needed to support those outposts. So it was very much very modular and very flexible. So, when we left Iraq around 2009 to 2011, a lot of the infrastructure just kind of lapsed. There's not a whole lot of preventative maintenance being done. So when we got back there in 2014, 2015, a lot of just repairs and stuff needed. A lot of the big infrastructure was there, but the plumbing, the electrical, all the other stuff needed to be touched up. So a lot of generator work, a lot of plumbing for showers, and a lot of just kind of rewiring of the electrical to make sure everything was up and running.
Did you and your team, or were you deployed, is it the Fukushima typhoon and nuclear reactor disaster? Because I believe the Navy responded to that, didn't they?
I want to say that was 2011. I did not personally respond. There was probably other components of the military that did for infrastructure logistics support. That's what the military primarily uses CBs for. A lot of it is what they call phase 0 operations, going to a country, setting up road projects, infrastructure projects to like basically help the economic situation of that environment. And that allows us entrance into places where we can kind of build rapport, provide value to those villages, those countries, and give RCBs training around construction methodology. So concrete work, vertical construction, plumbing, AC, whatever. The CBs are phenomenal at that. And like we get to test their skills every deployment of going to places in austere environments and doing the work that's necessary to provide access to those countries with like goodwill of infrastructure projects.
You've already mentioned that once you submitted your packet to get out, you really started thinking more about Trident Coffee. Mm-hmm. And before we go down that path, I want to take you all the way back. Where does coffee start for you? Like what was the entryway? Have you always been a coffee drinker?
I didn't really start drinking coffee until after college. I think like most people, the initial thing is just energy drinks. You know, your Monsters, your Red Bulls, your whatever the case may be. And so like I've always been in health and wellness, working out. So the amount of pre-workout I would take plus caffeine from energy drinks, I just noticed, hey, that's not good. Like the ingredient labels, they don't really know what goes in them. And so like one of the
ignorance is bliss. They just taste good.
Yes, absolutely. Because like one of the deployments we would work kind of during the day all the way into the night because it was more night operation. So we wouldn't get to the gym until midnight. So I would take this pre-workout that had like 400 milligrams of caffeine and God knows what else. And so I just, over time, your adrenal glands just get kind of shot. And
why am I shaking?
Yeah. And so coffee for me was always there. Coffee culture was great in a couple of places I was at up in Washington. I was stationed there and I was always an iced Americano guy. I never cared for hot coffee. But when I was over in Israel, that's all they did was Turkish style coffee. So before every meeting, I'd have to sit down and kind of communicate with people that, someone from the US is over here and communicating with the local. And we created a really good relationship and rapport over coffee. And, but it was always Turkish style coffee. So basically grounds, hot water, mix up. And for me, it was great because it was a communal beverage. Like I got to know these people over multiple meetings over coffee. And so to me, that kind of showcased like how important culturally it is for basically bridging gaps. So again, blonde hair, blue eyed guy from San Diego. I'm speaking with my Israeli counterpart. I'm trying to buy goods from. I don't have cash. I don't have a credit card. I basically send them some paperwork, say, hey, some guy in Germany from the US is going to pay you in 30 days after I receive this product.
Trust me.
So that takes a lot of rapport building because, we were getting hundreds of $1,000s worth of materials for these projects in Israel. And I don't have a dime to show these guys for it. And it's really just based off relationship. And thank God the money came through at 30 days, so I didn't get buried in a quarry somewhere. But that showed me the cultural impacts of how important coffee can be to bring people together, to bring down walls, create bridges around this communal drink. But I was always cold coffee drinker. So this is where the cold brew for me started coming into place of seeing what the craft beer scene did here in San Diego, kind of created this really great renaissance around craft beverages. And I wanted to kind of impart that somehow, some way into the coffee space. Because again, I saw a leading trend of cold brew becoming more and more prominent, of people drinking cold coffee more regularly, especially being here in San Diego. We got normally more warmer climate. And so that kind of led me in the direction of what I wanted to do post-military, of kind of blending these two things together as this kind of craft, amazing health drink into this community kind of forum. And so that's kind of our core values, is connection, community, and character. And so we really saw, hey, if we can bring people together and realize, hey, we're not so different. Let's just talk about, hey, where are we on the same side on this? And that will close the gap much better, instead of like, hey, you think this way, I think this way. You'll never get closer. And then unfortunately, as we've seen a lot of today in today's society, is that we don't give ourselves a chance to feel, hey, what do you think? This is how I think. Where do we have commonality? And coffee gave me that opportunity when I was overseas, seeing that it really helped me bridge the gaps to create these relationships with my foreign counterparts, who probably normally I wouldn't have the opportunity to create those relationships and get done what I needed to get done.
Do you remember your first experience with cold brew?
Trying to think. I can't fully remember first experience. I think, honestly, I was so used to like iced coffee. Easy. You just brew coffee hot, throw ice over it. Still pretty acidic. And I think I came home from one deployment. I started just brewing cold brew. I think through a filter, this one machine, and just drain it out over 24 hours in the fridge. I was like, oh, okay, this is actually a pretty good pre-workout. I like the flavor of it better. I can drink it more easily. It's not as acidic. And so I believe that was like 2014-ish, probably from my recollection, the first kind of experience with cold brew coffee, not just iced coffee.
With you now looking at, there's the exit I'm going to be getting out the summer of 2016.
Yep.
You already mentioned grad school and starting to put the plans together, but walk me through that initial, like, all right, here's what I'm going to do, and started making plans. So was grad school the first thing you wanted to do?
I think it was a combination. So kind of put the initial things in place in 2015 to like start the concept. So we were brewing cold brew, putting them in kegs and trying to distro those around San Diego, and especially while I was gone. That was just one way to kind of keep the idea going and get customer feedback.
What was that experience like as far as learning the process of brewing and trying to keg it?
We leaned heavily on the beer brewers here in San Diego, of talking to people we knew that were in the space and just kind of learning and reverse engineering what was applicable to us while taking the lessons learned from the beer side. But it's very similar to like any sort of what I would consider a craft beverage, like wine, beer, even some of like the mezcal distilled drinks. There's a process to it. If you take great ingredients, great water, and have this process, you can make a great product. And so for me, trying to figure all that stuff out, a lot of it was trial and error. A lot of it was bad batches, and just messing around in my kitchen and just figuring ratios out, like what makes the best cold brew, light, medium, dark roast, whatever the case may be. I have a full binder about this thick of all the different trials and things. And then I would start bringing it into work and have my coworkers taste it. It's like, hey, what do you guys think about this? So it was like the initial start was there to kind of get the feedback of like, is cold brew coffee a thing? And it led to yes, but we had to always continue to refine the process to make it better and better. We just didn't want to do it one way and then this is the way we do it and never learn from it. So we've iterated so many times over the past several years since we've been open to continue to make it the best product and find ways to continue to tweak the ratio, tweak the recipes to like get it to be, in our opinion, the best tasting cold brew out in the market.
When you decided that you're now going to make steps towards, I'm going to start a business, you mentioned the notebook where you're tracking every single iteration of a recipe. Did that come just from a natural instinct of yours, like, hey, I want to jot this down? Or did you get a mentor who kind of gave you some guidance, like, hey, make sure you're doing A, B, and C?
I think it was just my engineering mindset. Engineers constantly test hypotheses and figure out, hey, you have an input, you have a black box, you have an output. All right, so I know the input, this is the output I get. What goes on in this black box that I can kind of distill and make a thought around and form an idea and then continue to test that idea? So I think that's where the note-taking came from, was just that general engineering kind of mindset of, hey, let's start with this, we'll get an output, and then we can tweak of the input to see how that changes the output. And then kind of, find patterns, find ways to kind of force what our desired output is through the input and then test it.
So when you got out, was Trident up and running?
Yeah, so we had, we were doing stuff out of my garage, doing like distribution of kegs, and we started to bottle up in glass bottles and kind of sell it around San Diego. And during that time of grad school, 2016, 2017, we found that Imperial Beach location and started the construction. So as I'm going to school, I'm also doing construction, any free time available, still making products, still running around the store, selling it. So it was a wild, as soon as I got out of the military in July of 2016, I started grad school like 5 days later. And it's been a whirlwind ever since. It's just been go, go, go. So it was nice to kind of build that up. But I think from where we've started, it has changed quite a bit to where we are now. And that's just through learning, trial and errors, failing. I think that's the biggest thing of entrepreneurship that I've learned, is that you're going to fail so many times. That's okay. Just fail small, fall forward, and just continue that momentum. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It's just this failed. That's okay. And so it's just a mindset piece that just like, I truly believe in what we're doing. And so it's like, okay, there's always trials and tribulations along the way. Just pick yourself up, dust your knees off, and keep moving forward.
Where'd you go to grad school?
The University of Southern California has a great 1-year master's program specifically geared towards veterans. So because I didn't necessarily want to spend 2 years in an MBA. So this was a great middle ground for me to learn more about business, get the business acumen, learn more about finance, talk to mentors, talk to people who have done that, and kind of get a broader foundation set for my journey from military to business. And so that's been a phenomenal part of my education, was going through the Marshall School of Business for that program.
Was there a moment, looking back on it, because I know you mentioned you found the Imperial Beach location as your first storefront physical location, but was there that moment that you remember where, oh wait, we're catching on, people are buying our product? Was there a significant moment that you remember?
No, one of my biggest faults is I go from A to Z real fast. Cause like I know what it can look like, in 5, 10, 20 years. And so I kind of lean more heavily into moving forward quickly. And so probably should have taken a few slower steps and build out a little more things, because we kind of jumped right into it. We built out this brewery, we bought the coffee roaster, we bought the canning line, we did all these things to go hot and heavy into this. But I wish I would have maybe taken a little bit slower approach, be a little more methodical, but it was selling, and it was selling well. So I was like, okay, let's just use the momentum. So that for us was like a learning point for us. Like, hey, maybe we should take a little bit slower break and set up more of a deeper, thicker foundation before trying to scale too quickly, because we didn't really have the resources to go exponential. We were just kind of building it up, bootstrapping it here and there. And so we are where we are now, and now we're kind of learning, regrouping, and keeping into a more tighter focus as we grow from here.
You've said that you are a cold brew, a cold iced coffee type guy. That's where your inception was, or your entry into coffee. But your company also provides traditional, coffee beans roasted for hot coffee. Did you find that you forced yourself to become a student of coffee when you decided to make a business out of this? Yeah,
and that's kind of one thing I like, is I enjoy learning. And so what's amazing about the internet now is that there's YouTube videos, there's podcasts, there's so many ways to distill information down to kind of figure out, hey, what do you need to take away from this and apply it to what you want to do. So I really went to a couple coffee schools, like learned how to roast, read a bunch of books about water profiles, because like coffee and water were our two ingredients. So I had to make sure they paired up well. And so it took us like a couple years as we got started to really figure out what's really pairing well through trial, error, iterations. So, I mean, we've sold over, 1.5 million cans of cold brew since we started. We've done so much coffee, but there's still so much to learn. So our initial thought was, hey, cold brew is just going to take over. Everyone's going to gravitate towards it. But what I didn't take into consideration is consumer habits. Is people have been drinking hot coffee for the last 30, 40, 50 years. So we had to meet them where they're at. And so we added an espresso machine, and that really helped kind of grow sales too, because we're no longer forcing cold brew on people. We can let them kind of gravitate toward it naturally as they try it and sample it, but we can still meet them. Hey, I'm just a hot latte. That's my kind. Easy. Here you go. So we roasted our coffee specifically for cold brew. But the benefit of that, through that whole roasting profile that I learned along the way, is that by doing so, you make the coffee less acidic, just in general. So if either you brew it hot or you brew it cold, it's going to be a much cleaner, easier to drink coffee. And so our roaster, I believe, is one of the best in the world. It roasts it phenomenally. Very even, very uniform. There's not a lot of scorch marks or burnt marks that causes that kind of metallic, oxidative flavor that you get in some like overly dark coffee. So we found this nice pairing through, our scientific evaluation of the cold brew, of how to make it best for consumption, from all the way from our roasted coffee, the green coffee that we source, how we roast it, how we brew it with the water, to the end product. So there's been a bunch of stages along the way that we've tweaked and pulled these levers to make it, in our opinion, the best cold brew out there.
Is brewing coffee, or creating a roast for coffee, is it like wine, where in the sense that you don't rely on just one bean from one region, it's always a conglomeration of multiple beans from multiple regions?
So a lot of places do that. They'll do blends. So they'll take coffee from Colombia, they'll take coffee from Brazil, they'll take coffee from Mexico, and then they do a blend. And that specifically makes a more uniform flavor. So for consistency wise, that's phenomenal. But what we wanted to do from a craft aspect is show how unique coffee is coming from all these different countries around the world. So we have a light roast from Ethiopia that is blueberry, fruity, and floral. Like most people would not expect that from a coffee. Then we have, a dark roast from Peru that's like so rich and bold, but still super smooth. Then our, Brazilian coffee is nutty, chocolatey, caramel. So it was really kind of cool to show people the nuances, which is what I think a lot of wineries do now, like a single estate wine, right? It's from that, terra, from that earth that produces a certain flavor. Same thing with coffee. Whether it's sun-grown, shade-grown, grown with citrus fruits nearby, grown with pineapples or bananas nearby, it will always change. So we wanted to kind of showcase that and not convolute the flavor with all these blends. We wanted to have the coffee be a standalone, like this is the craft product, is the coffee itself. And so that's been kind of fun for us in highlighting specifically these single origin coffees. And that's been a great experience for us to bring that to the customers as they try, one of the 8 cold brews on tap.
From your experience though, will there be a variation in the same bean year to year just with the harvest and the growing process, just like a wine grape?
There's definitely potential for some variation. Weather patterns have a big part to do with it. The fact that we get all organic green coffee in, which means that there's less pesticide usage, so less chance for kind of tainting of the flavor. But it really relies on the wherewithal, the knowledge, and the skill of the grower. They have to really maintain the soil levels, make sure there's proper hydration, make sure there's proper nutrients. So we've really relied on trying to work with those farmers. They're like, hey, how are you making this process to keep it consistent for year to year? And there are some of the best like agriculturists that are part of those teams that understand soil composition to a T. Like they're probably PhD smart, like type level. And so that's what's really cool is kind of showing that craft aspect instead of just a commodity, which, a lot of lower level, low grown, mass produced coffee ends up being as a commodity. And so they have mechanical farming, they have all this other stuff that you're not going to get the best quality. So we went to level up to find specialty grade coffee where these farmers are taking such great care of their land, their soil, and they get to sell the coffee for more. And so then we get to take that and share that with the customer. And so it's very much a very large ecosystem to understand all the supply chain pieces of coffee import export. But we've done a great job of finding the best providers from those countries with organic, and then being able to kind of showcase how we make it and brew it really facilitates that craft aspect that you're going to taste that coffee very differently than just a blend. So, because people have such a strong emotional connection with coffee. If you're on your honeymoon with your significant other in Hawaii, man, Hawaiian coffee is the best coffee I've ever had. You're just carefree on a beach in Hawaii drinking, Kona coffee. And that just creates that emotional connection to it. So if you've traveled to Peru, you've traveled to Ethiopia, you've traveled to Papua New Guinea, you've traveled wherever, that coffee tends to be some of the best coffee you've ever tasted because you're immersed in it. So you bring that experience back. Then when you see it on our menu, like, oh, like Mexican coffee, let me get that. So we're like creating this emotional connection with the customer because of their previous experiences with coffee. And we can kind of rely on that to create really strong bonds with them. Like, okay, like your Mexican coffee is phenomenal. Like I just buy it. So, but it gives people the opportunity to try out different stuff along the way.
Were there organizations or groups that you were able to get involved with to help you make the connection with these growers in these various countries?
A lot of it's been through network, meeting people that are, or know people that are either importers or whatever the case may be that introduce us to coffee farmers. So we've been to Mexico, Brazil, Peru, and Vietnam. And so COVID kind of threw a wrench in the plan to travel internationally, but get to go and see firsthand, like how much work is put into growing coffee. A lot of these are smaller farmers, that's their livelihood. And so you get to go experience, and it changes your perspective in terms of, hey, like I'm getting this coffee drink, but when you go back a couple steps of someone's handpicking those cherries off the tree, thousands of miles away. For me, it puts things in a completely different perspective that I get to appreciate it much more of how hard work goes into making the coffee. Then we just get the opportunity to craft it in a way that hopefully makes it a very great experience for our customers.
When you got to go meet some of these coffee farmers, especially in other countries, was there anything that you learned or experienced that they did with making coffee for themselves that you're kind of like, oh, I never thought about that. Or it was just a unique thing that they did?
Yeah, so a lot of the times, majority of the coffee they end up harvesting goes out for sale, so to make livelihood for their family. But what was great is we went to a few places that have like full testing laboratories, more or less, for the coffee. So you do the full analysis of sensory, taste, smell, kind of the whole thing. And so you're tasting coffee with these people who just pulled it off the hillside, and you get to experience that with them, and they're like tasting their coffee. It's like, oh, like you see the satisfaction in their face of like all the hard work and effort goes into making this coffee, and now they get the process to sell it. And you're there seeing firsthand as soon as it comes off the hillside, getting processed, and they're tasting it right there. So those cupping events were just phenomenal to see firsthand the appreciation that they have for their product, and then we get to use it on the back end.
I'm asking this because I enjoy coffee. I've never really gone deep into the specifics of it, but I look at it as learning to appreciate it the same way I've come to learn to appreciate wine. Mm-hmm. And when you meet somebody who actually produces wine and they can tell you little nuances, or they have that experience of knowing exactly when, to them, in this case, a coffee bean or a wine grape is just right, where the next person might say, you know what? I'm going to leave it on the vine another week. Mm-hmm. And it's those subtle differences that when you really start exploring the flavors of wine or the flavors of coffee is where the grower starts having an input.
Absolutely. So the wine community has their sommeliers that go through and do the full sensory testing and get to grade the coffee. Coffee has Q graders, and it's a very similar process. They're looking at basically all the five senses in terms of grading the coffee as it goes. So they'll go through, they'll do their cupping, and they will pick up a lot of the nuances that my palate is not as refined for, because that's just what they do. And so they were able to grade a coffee. They were able to put a score to it, and they were able to kind of tell you what to expect as you roast it. And so there's different varietals of coffee. There's different elevations. There's different soil. There's all these different factors that go into coffee. And then their job is, as it gets pulled down by the lot, the farm, wherever it's grown, then to go through the sensory portion of it and grade it, score it, and kind of provide some sort of flavor profile to it. And so that's been really cool to see, like a true master of their craft go through that whole process. So they're on the field. They have, a lot of times they wear like wristbands of the color to pull the cherry from. And so then you go through all that, and then you wash it, process it, and do the whole thing, and then you're tasting it. And just to see their brain working of tasting all that nuance, just like you see a sommelier when they're grading a wine, it's like, that is amazing to see that you have that amount of refinement in the palate to really be able to show like this is the craft part of the business. And that was so cool to see.
So you've mentioned that IB was first, mm-hmm. then OB.
Coronado. Yeah, Coronado.
Coronado was during COVID or opened. Now, there's no way to anticipate or prepare for COVID, but mm-hmm. did COVID kind of knock you guys backwards a little bit?
It was strange because, with our core values of connection, community, character, when COVID hit, people lost that sense of normalcy. Like, I can just go to my local coffee shop and get a cup of coffee and things aren't so bad, because there was so much doubt, so much fear being casted of, potentially how bad COVID could be, this, that, and the other. So our IB shop did really well during COVID because we were able to stay open, socially distanced, this, that, and the other. But people were able to come through as like, okay, with everything else going on around me, I can still come to my favorite community spot and get my cup of coffee. And then, okay, the world's not so bad. So giving those people that sense of normalcy, our customer base was phenomenal. And that's actually what led us to open Coronado, because we saw how resounding that impact was to having a community space. We're being socially distanced. You can't visit loved ones that are in the hospital. You have this separation, and we as humans are naturally collective, tribal. So that for us was a great thesis to be like, hey, people still love these community opportunities. Whether you find your tribe at the gym, you find it at work, you find it wherever, the jiu-jitsu gym for you probably, you find those core group of people. Like, I enjoy spending time with these people. It's a little break away from the world, and I get to roll with these guys, and I don't look at my phone. I don't think about anything else. I'm just in time right now, and we're rolling around. We're doing, getting a great workout in and creating those bonds. So we saw our retail opportunity for our tap rooms to provide that. And that's always something that has been exciting people when we see customer reviews and feedback. Is like, it's such a cool concept that we focus so heavily on cold brew, that it's so unique for people and they love the experience. So for us, opening Coronado was a second test of that concept, and it's done very well. And then PB has been another great kind of flag post for us. Like, hey, people really love coming to get a craft experience and around cold brew. So all these have been like learning evolutions for us along the way to make it better, tweak the concept, tweak the flow, the offerings, whatever the case may be, to continue to refine our process and refine our offerings.
And you bring up a good point, and I say this a little bit jokingly when you're referring to the impact of COVID and all of the businesses that got shut down. But as you talked about earlier on, coffee is one of those things that's just part of our society that we just assume, for most people, it's a morning thing. But you think about how many people on their way to work or running out the door, the one thing they won't forget is their cup of coffee. And when you put it in that perspective of, I never even thought about, jokingly, coffee's an essential, the same way going to the supermarket is.
Well, I mean, you look at the stats, there's over 500 million cups of coffee consumed daily just in the United States. So, you take all average of, how many adults above 18 and over are probably consuming it. That's 2 or 3 per day per person. And it's not the whole population, but it's definitely integrated in our society. And so, we saw a really cool opportunity. Starbucks really laid the groundwork for making coffee more mainstream, not just instant like Folgers or Maxwell House, and creating this kind of coffee revolution inside the US that made this third place for people to gather. And so what, Howard Schultz did with Starbucks is an amazing success story. And so for us, we wanted to pay homage to that, of having a great experience around coffee, but we just thought it was important to bring cold brew to the front and center and showcase a new way to appreciate the craft of coffee, not just through espresso, this, that, and the other. So that's been our whole kind of concept and thesis, is cold brew is how we feel it's best to enjoy coffee. From the health benefits to also the kind of community aspect of, you can kind of grab it on the go, you can go for a walk, you can kind of do your thing with your friends, family, go to the gym, whatever. And so that's been really fun to see the feedback from people and always find ways to try to make it better. But so far the concept has been very well received, and I think we're the only ones that really kind of do it this way.
I'm old enough to remember before there were coffee in the sense of Starbucks. When I was a kid, if you said it was a coffee shop, it was a place where you went, you got breakfast, maybe lunch. The coffee pot or the brewing station had 50, 20, whatever it is, the filters already pre-layered out, and they were just stuck on each other because they would just one right after another. And there's a part of me that still enjoys that coffee aspect. But it's weird to think, if you'd have told me 25 years ago, hey, there's eventually going to be not just Starbucks, but coffee shops on corners with a drive-through. It's amazing to see the progression, the way coffee has changed in our society. Yeah,
and what we kind of saw was, obviously coffee is a very big cornerstone of kind of daily life. Caffeine, get going, feel good. But it was really interesting to see what the craft beer industry did in San Diego, is kind of taking kind of a white paper, if you would, of how to bring people together. And you go to a tap room for a brewery, everyone's kind of connected, big tables together, people drinking beer, no headphones on, no laptop out. They were connecting. And so we thought of trying to bring that same ambiance to coffee, where sometimes you go into coffee shops, people are, this is definitely more of a productivity drink. So they want to be on their laptops, this and the other. So we have that blend, but when we see people coming in, sitting down, no laptop, no headphones, groups of 2, 4, 6, 8, just connecting with everybody, like that to us is amazing. And so it's really cool to kind of bridge what craft beer has done into what coffee allows for with the productivity side, and kind of merge the two together.
Are you offering food also?
We're working on expanding our menu right now. So we have our own bakery that produces gluten-free, keto pastries. So for us, again, following that health and wellness umbrella is very important to try to be like more or less a healthy version of Dunkin' Donuts. So we have really great keto protein donuts that people can enjoy at our tap room along with their coffee. And we're going to be adding some additional foods like some gluten-free avocado toast, as well as low to no sugar acai bowls, which we feel it's going to be great. Acai pairs really well with coffee, especially during the summer, but it's loaded with sugar. If you look at the ingredients, it's mostly cane sugar in the sorbet. So through some of the stuff that we've learned along the way, we can add, a allulose mixture that has no sugar, very low calorie, and still make it sweet. So people are going to still enjoy what they're used to, but get it in a much healthier format.
For you, with the process of learning coffee, have you come around to being a warm coffee or hot coffee drinker?
Still no. No, I mean, I get spoiled. I have, we are making cold brew constantly. I just get what's left over type thing. So I'm just still a cold coffee drinker. Even like, again, when I was living in Washington, it'd be 30, 40 degrees, I'd still get an iced Americano and people thought I was crazy. So that's just how I gravitate towards. I just love the feel of cold brew, the flavor, the Nitro part of it. It just makes it easier for me to drink because like I probably have a sensitive mouth where like hot beverages or hot soups really agitate it. So cold brew for me is just a way to enjoy it better.
For me, I still enjoy a hot cup of coffee, but obviously I remember my dad as a kid, it would be in the middle of August and he would, it's like, how are you drinking that? And I've not crossed that bridge yet. Mm-hmm. There are some mornings where it's just like, no, it's already 80 degrees at 7 o'clock. I can't drink a cup of coffee. And that's with the advent of Nitro. It's like, oh, I can still get the coffee taste and now be a cold drink.
Yep.
But for me, I like that warm cup of coffee.
And that's what we're trying to showcase is that, as a craft product, it's still very individualized to the person, how they like to enjoy it. And so you always customize it as needed. And so even though we focus on cold brew, our roasted coffee, if you buy some of our roasted coffee, it's roasted best for cold brew, but that does not mean you cannot make it hot. And so the process that we do at roasted, we'll just remove some of the acidity and make it easier to drink, whether you brew it hot through an espresso, however you do it. It's just a very different structure and methodology to traditional coffee roasters. So that's something we learned along the way of kind of comparing notes with other roasters. Like, how do you roast this coffee? See their chart, their graph. I'm like, oh, we roast it very differently. And for us, that made the cold brew taste a lot better.
I'm just going to say your calm under pressure is really good. It's my go-to coffee. Yep. One of the things that was coming to my mind, though, when you were talking about creating that tap room environment, and I don't want to go off on the unicorn and rainbows side of it, but you can allow people to come together. They can experience something that gives them different flavor profiles, but they can go and get in their car and not be impaired, as opposed to if they were sitting in a beer tap house, 3 or 4 drinks into it, they're not able to drive. Yeah. So again, not trying to go rainbows and unicorns, but that's a cool aspect also, is still giving people that socializing aspect, still give them something that they can drink and enjoy, but it doesn't impair them.
I mean, there's been a kind of a big shift over the past couple of years with younger consumers not drinking as much alcohol. And so, they're more inclined for health and wellness, being active. Because like when COVID hit, and again, you meant like there's just that lack of social opportunity to be out with friends and connect with people. It forced everyone to kind of go online, and you're communicating via Instagram, via text, whatever. Nothing compares to human interaction. It's by far the best. There's no substitute for it. And so now this younger generation is coming out of COVID and like, okay, I need to find like my tribe, my group, my people. And so that connection piece is still super important. Regardless how digital we go with AI, VR, whatever the case may be, it's always super important that humans are wired for social interaction. And that is something that we deem very important. And we want to build a community around that, but really focus on the health and wellness piece too, because if people can live and have a healthier life, they in turn are just a better person because they have more energy. They're not taking that slight and being grumpy and then quick to the trigger on being aggressive or angry towards somebody. They have a little more patience. They have a little more empathy. So that to us is like, if you're healthy, you can be a better version of yourself and put your best foot forward, which is why we focus so much on the health and wellness benefits of coffee, not just dosing you up with a bunch of sugar and then you peak for an hour and then you crash and then you're irritable, you're agitated, you may not be the best version of yourself. So that's why it's so important for us to really make the daily drink that people are enjoying the healthiest version possible so they can become the best version of themselves.
Is there anything that you do differently with your process to make decaf coffee?
So primarily the process has already taken place when you buy the green coffee. So there is MC methylchlorination, which is not great. We don't recommend that. Chemical process to make it. Then you have Swiss water process, which is more of a natural process. So there's a whole trademark patent on this process, but still keeps a little bit of caffeine, but removes the majority of it through a more natural process to get the decaf bean. And so we don't do anything different from that. That's how it comes. But again, how we roast it and brew it has an impact on the flavor of it. To still get that really rich coffee flavor, but not get the caffeine necessarily from it.
Inherently, by going through that process of decaffeinization, if that's even a word, does it impact the flavor profile?
It could slightly. So the main thing that has caffeine in green coffee is called chlorogenic acid. So that also is severely impacted when you roast it. If you roast a lighter roast, less of it burns off. If you roast it longer, more of it burns off. So light roast technically has the most amount of caffeine. So there's so much variables that go into that. The roasting to flavor impact, there's over, I think, 1,000 chemical reactions that occur during the roasting process. So making sure your roaster is super consistent, making sure you have an input, you have your output, and you can kind of test the variables in between to get the best output possible.
Have you become one of those people when you're brewing coffee, it's all about exact measurements, exact water amounts, or are you just kind of, I think back to as a kid growing up, like I said, my dad drank instant coffee. He grabbed a spoonful, he threw it in the cup, put hot water on top of it, called it a day.
Yep.
And now I know that there's people who do pour overs and French. And again, I'll probably eventually get there because I've enjoyed the process as I've gotten older of enjoying flavors. So as you're younger, you're drinking beer and then someone exposes you to a craft beer. Like, look at the flavors you're experiencing. Same thing. You start out, you drink wine, and then somebody starts saying, okay, do you want to taste some different wines? The same thing I'm experiencing now with coffee. I'm seeing that I'm going from just give me a cup of black coffee to what flavors can I get out of it? Yeah,
and that again goes back to the individualization of the coffee experience. Everyone kind of has their go-to, pour over, French press, espresso, cold brew, drip. And so those nuances kind of come through differently, but you can still get to the customization piece. So the reason why we selected single origin coffee is to really accentuate that, to not to mask any flavors between blends, so that if someone truly is in the craft mindset, they can get the best version of that coffee by itself. And so that way it leads to, one, the curiosity side. Like if you were to try a lager from Budweiser and someone, hey, try this IPA from Ballast Point or from there. You're like, whoa, this is so different. Then you get that a little more appreciation of like, what can the beer be? What can the coffee be on its own? And so that is a customer education journey that starts somewhere and has, different maturity as it goes. Some people don't care. Some people get the itch and they start scratching that itch. And for us, just making the best craft product possible allows for them to go to different levels at different times, depending on where they're at in that cycle.
Now, for you going forward, or the company going forward, where do you see yourself in the next couple of years, and what's on your growth mindset? Is it more storefronts? Is it more direct to consumer? A hybrid blend, maybe out of California?
We've got a lot of interest to try to franchise and get out of state. But with our craft process and like trying to ship kegs across country, it ends up not being where we want to scale the product right now and the brand. So again, we've gone through some iterations of kind of researching where consumer habits are now. We have an amazing instant cold brew product with great functional ingredients like MCT oil, mushrooms, electrolytes for on the go. So we're taking all that bit of craft, functional health and wellness, and providing the consumer with the means to go do what they want to do, when they want to do it, where they want to do it. So for us, scaling that is much more appropriate than trying to open more tap rooms, which can be very labor intensive, very capital intensive, and then maintaining.
Temecula would be a great location. Just saying.
Yeah. But then you have also the quality control aspect to it as well, because now you say you have 20 shops all over the state of California. How can you maintain the same customer service support? How can you maintain making sure that the quality is there? So for us, this is the new direct consumer strategy is a much better way to grow the health and wellness aura that is Trident Coffee with, coffee, mushrooms, functional ingredients to the masses. And so we see our tap rooms as a great customer experience and touch point, because people are still in the very tactile mindset. They want to go touch, feel, and get an experience. Then that can lead them into the direct-to-consumer or Amazon channels down the line, because they may be visiting from Nevada. They may be visiting from Texas. Hey, I really liked this coffee. Now I can get it online at my convenience and go from there.
Going back to you personally and getting into the business world, you mentioned you really got a great education in supply chain and logistics through the Navy, but then you also went and got your MBA. For somebody who might be on that cusp, making their transition, thinking about wanting to be an entrepreneur, do you feel that you got, and I know this is a bit of a loaded question, was it beneficial to go back and get your MBA? If you had to do it all over again, do you think you would still do it? I
think there's great aspects of at least the program I went to. It was only 1 year, so it wasn't a full 2 years immersed into that. It gave me a really good broad brushstroke to understand business. And I think that's super important. Do I think you absolutely need to go to school? I don't. But for me, it was great to be connected with the USC network, which is absolutely phenomenal, and provide a bunch of mentorship that was needed. So school can do multiple things for you. My kind of thesis is that it's phenomenal for the network. You can learn the same thing at different educational, this and the other. That's not as important as just the network you surround yourself with. Because as you go to school, there might be your future business partner there. There might be an investor there, or there might be this or that. So I think the network piece is important, because as you put your idea out to the world, you need traction, you need supporters, you need whatever resources are necessary to go from A to Z. And so that, I think, has been the most beneficial piece for me to understand business acumen and the network to help grow the business.
Did you put a mentor in place as a business mentor before you got going?
Not really. That was definitely one of my biggest failings. Is I would, ask around and this and the other, but I never really fully solidified a actual mentor. It was just pieces here and there, kind of consolidating out of the ether, pulling it together. And so I think I've done a much better job now, where I have mentors and guides and really strong business insight and mentorship that are coming our way now. And then really leaning into those two, not just oh, I know what I'm doing. That's not the best way to handle it. So being more, dropping the ego a little bit, knowing you have potentially a great idea, but it's going to take a village to make it happen. There's not too many solopreneurs out there. Even the best had an amazing team to support their idea and their vision. And then they just did the best they could to lead that team into that direction.
If I'm understanding correctly, there's a little bit of your nature to just kind of jump in and then figure it out as you go, if I'm understanding correctly.
Oh, yeah.
From a business perspective, and obviously this is individual to everybody, but are some people, in your opinion, maybe too hamstrung by overthinking things and just not trying?
I think so there's always a trade-off. You can spend a lot of time planning, market research, and formulating the best possible idea, and you wait for the right time. Vice, I had this concept around cold brew, and that has changed so many times since we started, from kegs to bottles to cans to roasted coffee, now to instant. As we've gone and kind of learned along the way, the customer is going to tell you where to go. So you can have the best idea in the world, but there's no one out there to buy it and enjoy it. Why'd you spend 2 years thinking about something? By going out there and testing. So I think the best thing our entrepreneurship instructor taught us at USC was the minimal viable product. What's the smallest thing that you can do that's in your core thesis to test against, and then get the feedback and continue to iterate off that feedback. And so that is something I think we've learned and done a pretty good job. We've always done things more at smaller scale first without having to, go super crazy, and then test it and build it out and refine it as we kind of move along the plan. So it's not a huge waste of investment, time, money, and energy of waiting for the perfect opportunity. You build it to the best of your current capabilities and then test it and refine it along the way.
Has there been a flavor that you've put out or a roast that you've put out that you're like, this is going to sell, and it just fell flat?
Yeah, I think we've tried some iterations with like a mocha flavor, a vanilla flavor, and it could have been a couple things. It could have been we thought the flavor was great. It could have been some of the branding, how we messaged it appropriately. So we've iterated the packaging substantially since we've started to make it more refined, easier for the customer to, what am I getting? What am I buying? And so we had this whole complicated thing of the artwork and these super fancy names and put those forward, but we basically rewent through the process of, hey, brand forward, product forward. So you just have Trident Coffee, Nitro cold brew, dark roast. Customer knows exactly what they're getting. We used to have all the artwork and stuff forward, like the craft aspect of it forward, and it just kind of threw people off. They're like, not really sure what I'm getting into. So that's the test and fail and learn and progress. So it's so many iterations of things that we've thought were going to work well. You tested it in the market and then just didn't meet up to expectations, and you just change, adapt.
Taking it back a little bit to the military. So on a personal level, how was transitioning out for you? Did you find that you've already mentioned you had a whirlwind of events going on when you got out, between going back to school, getting the business. So you had a lot of things to keep you occupied. But how was that transition out for you at the personal level?
I don't think I let myself figure it out at the time. It's just like, if you don't stop, you can never really feel anything. So it was just like a steamroll through. And then once you have a little more time to reflect, you're like, hey, I kind of missed the people, or maybe I didn't do all the proper paperwork to get out and make it. So it ended up being pretty hard and challenging because for me, the military was a great sense of community, camaraderie. I worked with great people, sense of purpose. And then as you kind of do this own thing, you realize you're kind of isolated as an entrepreneur. You're not really, you have to like make it. You have to like literally craft the environment that you're around. And that took a while. So between getting out, going straight to grad school, and then launching this business, I never really let myself slow down and feel the feels. And so it kind of all, probably like maybe like a few years before COVID, it's like, oh my God, like I just steamrolled through all of this and I didn't really process what it meant to fully get out of the military. And so it was a challenge for sure. And my saving grace is just surrounding myself with great people. Great coworkers, business partners, friends, family. And I think the biggest challenge is when people transition is that lack of purpose and lack of community. So whatever happens, do not isolate yourself. Do not think you have to do this alone. That's when kind of bad things happen. So stay connected with people, text, reach out, meetups, find a great community to be involved with, either at the gym, work, wherever the case may be. Just do not think isolation and think you're the only one going through any problem that you do have. That is not the way to solve it. So it took me a while to figure that out, and I've rectified that since and created a great community around myself to not have that transition be as hard as it is for some. But that it had to be curated, and I didn't always make it work perfectly. It's been, all right, what am I missing? I'm missing great people in my life. I'm missing a sense of purpose. So the business gives me that purpose. And then being around great people reinvigorate that purpose because I can see the joy that I'm bringing to people on a daily basis.
And obviously through the brand Trident, you stayed connected to your military heritage, being a veteran. But as far as making that transition and starting this business, was there a veteran component that you leaned on in any way?
Not necessarily. We kind of drew a distinction that, the veteran part of our business is part of our story. It's part of our service. And, even back to World War II, when veterans came back, they had to transition into civilian life. There's been phenomenal CEOs, managers, mentors, you name it, that came from that service. We didn't want to have to lean on that as the sole reason why people looked at us to purchase. We wanted to create some stories around it. We wanted to create this health and wellness umbrella around it so that our sense of service translated from military into our service as citizens to others. And then being that health and wellness coffee brand to come to. And so it always ties to service, but we never pushed it as like, come support us because we're veterans. So we wanted to have a really clean distinction as like, this is all part of our journey, right? Every single one of us is on our own hero's journey. And how can we best support those people around us to be the best version of themselves in that hero's journey? And that's around health and wellness for us and storytelling.
So now that you're 5 years into it, putting on your advisor hat, what are some key pieces of advice that you would, especially from your experience, would advise to somebody transitioning out, but especially thinking about going in and opening up or starting their own company?
For the transition phase, again, stay connected. Create some sort of community around yourself to help you get through some of the dark times, because there'll be depression bouts, there'll be all that stuff that comes up. Be around great people. Then for anything that's going into the entrepreneurship side, yes, plan, test, iterate, but stay laser focused for the first couple of years on the one channel in which you want to go. Like, we opened a brick and mortar, we did distribution, we did direct to consumer. We didn't have the resources to really solidify all three of those, because each one of their owns that, there's different parts of that business that's different from wholesale, that is different from direct to consumer, which is different from brick and mortar. So again, that was my part from going A to Z too quick. I just wanted to build it all up, and I thought it was all complementary. So I'd say laser focus on what you want to accomplish for the first couple of years. Don't deviate. Just if it's direct to consumer, stay direct to consumer. If it's retail, stay retail. If it's distribution, do distribution. Put all your focus into those channels, and then as those grow, you can then tap into those other channels for business growth.
From your experience, is there one thing that you look back on and you go, that I don't want to call it a failure, but if you were doing it over again, and again, these are always loaded questions, but if you could go back and do it over again, what wouldn't you do that you'd already done it? And I'll call it your biggest mistake.
We have another 5 hours, because I have like plenty of mistakes, but I would say the biggest one was not having that focus. Seeing where opportunity came and really kind of going through these different channels. They took different skill sets. They took different expertise that we didn't necessarily fully possess. We had to learn along the way. And so that just was much slower and much more painful, because we were trying to learn what it meant to go into wholesale, talking to buyers, talking to distributors, and, not knowing the lingo. Then opening up brick and mortar retail, the full on customer service aspect, the consistency, the customer experience, like they're all very different. So the biggest thing that I wish I could take back would be laser focused on one channel to start. Do it exceedingly well, better than any of your competition. And then as that grows, then you can look into deviate and bring in really solid people to help you grow a different channel if necessary. That's obviously very specific to probably a consumer packaged good CPG brand. But that's definitely something I wish I would be able to take back, to be able to laser focus the ideation instead of trying to grow all three channels of the business at the same time. It's very challenging.
For those listening, they obviously heard the ad read at the beginning of the episode. And I want to say thank you for taking the opportunity, or giving me the opportunity and taking a chance on the podcast. I was actually drinking your product when I reached out. So for anybody listening, this was not something where you were just looking for somebody to throw. I came to you and asked, and you agreed. So I'm greatly appreciative. In wrapping it up, is there anything else that we haven't hit on about your company that you want to make sure people know about?
Well, I think the biggest thing for us, I've mentioned a couple of times, is that as people go and look to consume coffee, again, so much of it's consumed daily. Really be laser focused on what's going into that beverage to make sure it's the healthiest version possible. Yes, the sugary drinks taste amazing, but you're not doing your pancreas and the rest of your body a favor when, diabetes potentially comes knocking on the door in 10, 20, 30 years. That happened in my family, and I saw firsthand the devastation it causes. And it is really preventable. Really focus on yourself. It's like most people don't pay attention to themselves often enough. They just kind of go through the flow because they're worried about their significant other. They're worried about their kids. They're worried about everyone else. take some time to focus on yourself and make sure you're the healthiest version possible, because then you can give so much more of yourself if that's what you really care about doing to those who you love around you. So for us, coffee is the way that we can really bridge that gap to have people focus on a healthy beverage to make sure that they're the best version of themselves for themselves and for others. Because that's how you grow, community. That's how you grow society, is having great people doing great things on a daily basis consistently. And you have to be healthy to do that. You look at Steve Jobs. Poor guy went out with pancreatic cancer at, I think, 56. And he has a lot of regrets for how he handled things before, of not taking care of himself, this, that, and the other. So you don't get a second chance. Do preventative, vice reactive medicine as best you can. So
you can't say that enough, because it's always, the best analogy is always when you're in an airplane, and they always tell you when the masks with the oxygen fall, take care of yourself first, because you can't help anybody else if you're not helping yourself. So you saying that is true. We oftentimes get so wrapped up in taking care of our family, making sure that our kids have what they need, that we forget, or we just don't make us a priority.
Yep. And it's not selfish. Like, I look at it in reverse. If I can go to the gym, if I can eat right, if I can take a little bit more time for myself, that gives me more energy to give to more people down the line that I come in contact with, and be a better version of myself because I'm eating right, I'm working out, I have the energy to give. If you're always run down, then you're showing up, but you could show up in a much better light for the others around you as well. And it's just more of like a disciplined self-confidence thing too, that it will give you, because you feel good. You're like, okay, this isn't that hard. Like, I can go do this, I can do that, I can help this person. So it's kind of a weird mindset, but it's, in my opinion, it's not selfish. It's actually the opposite. It's selfless, because you can then give more of yourself to those around you in a much better, meaningful way.
I appreciate your time. I wish you all the best going forward.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it, brother.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.